I'm Barbara, 28, female. I live in a quiet suburban town in a house that feels both like a sanctuary and a mausoleum. As an interior designer, I shape spaces for a living, but I never imagined the most important space I ever created. My home with my husband, Liam, would become the battleground for my entire future. Liam was the love of my life, and after he was taken from me, his own sister tried to tear down everything we had built, leaving me with nothing but a cruel, unforgettable command. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Our house was our masterpiece. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours, meticulously crafted from a neglected, forgotten property into a home filled with light and laughter. Liam, a brilliant software engineer, handled the logic, the wiring, the smart home integration, the structural necessities. I handled the soul, the flow of the rooms, the textures of the fabrics, the colors that told the story of our love. Every bookshelf, every tile, every window pane was a decision we made together. We had poured our savings and our hearts into that place for 3 years, imagining the children we'd raise within its walls, the holidays we'd host, the life we'd build until we were old and gray. We had just celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary and Liam's 29th birthday. Life felt perfect, a beautifully designed room where every piece was exactly where it was supposed to be. Then, one rainy Tuesday, a phone call ripped the room apart, a multi-car pileup on the interstate. Liam, on his way home from a client meeting, was gone in an instant. The world didn't just tilt on its axis, it fell away completely, leaving me in a silent, screaming freefall. The days that followed are a blur of casseroles from neighbors, hollow-eyed relatives offering condolences, and the suffocating weight of a silence in the house that was once filled with Liam's off-key singing. His sister, Jessica, was a constant presence during that initial period. She was 2 years older than him, a sharp, polished marketing manager who always seemed to carry an air of transactional efficiency, even in her grief. She took charge of the funeral arrangements, her voice crisp and clear as she ordered flowers and confirmed catering. At the time, I mistook her control for strength. I was so grateful I didn't have to make any more decisions. I clung to her, this last living piece of Liam, believing we were united in our shared, unbearable loss. She'd hug me, her embrace firm but brief, and say things like, "We have to be strong, Barbara. It's what he would have wanted." I leaned on that strength, never once suspecting it was the cold, hard resolve of a predator, not the supportive arm of family. She and her partner, Chris, a financial advisor with an unnervingly slick smile, flanked me at the funeral. They looked the part of the grieving family, their faces masks of perfect sorrow. I remember thinking, through the fog of my own pain, how lucky I was to have them, how naive I was. I didn't realize they weren't there to support me. They were there to assess their new assets. The house, the savings, the life Liam and I had so carefully constructed. In their eyes, it was all just a portfolio waiting to be liquidated. I was just a temporary obstruction, a grieving widow who needed to be managed until she could be gracefully, or not so gracefully, removed. The first hint of this came subtly, a week after we buried Liam. Jessica was helping me sort through some of his paperwork, and she lingered a little too long on bank statements and property deeds, her questions a little too pointed about finances. "Did Liam have a clear will?" she asked, her tone casual. "Just want to make sure everything is handled smoothly for you." I, lost in my own sea of sorrow, simply nodded and said he'd taken care of everything. I had no idea that for her, handled smoothly, meant clearing the path for her own gain. The world I knew had already been shattered by Liam's death, but I was about to find out that the rubble was going to be looted. The casseroles stopped coming. The sympathy cards dwindled to a trickle on the mantelpiece. The house grew quieter, the silence pressing in on me until I could hardly breathe. It had been 3 weeks since Liam's funeral, 3 weeks of waking up and remembering, for a brutal, gut-wrenching second, that the other side of the bed would be cold. Grief wasn't a wave, it was an ocean I was drowning in, and the only shore I thought I had was family. Jessica had been calling daily, her check-ins initially seeming like a lifeline, but the tone of her calls had begun to shift. The gentle "how are you holding up" was slowly replaced by a more pointed "have you started thinking about what's next?" It was a question that felt like a slap. What was next? There was no next without Liam. There was only the gaping, raw wound of before. The conversation I will never forget happened on a Saturday afternoon. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, mirroring the landscape of my heart. Jessica and Chris arrived unannounced, letting themselves in with the spare key I'd given her for emergencies. I was in the living room, sitting on the floor, surrounded by photo albums, trying to feel close to Liam. The sight of them in the doorway, standing there like a corporate delegation, sent a chill through me. "Barbara," Jessica began, not with a hug, but with a business-like tone that set my teeth on edge. "We need to talk. Chris and I have been discussing things, and we're worried about you." Chris nodded in agreement, his hands in his pockets, looking around the room as if he were appraising it. "This is a big house for one person," he said, his voice smooth and oily. "The upkeep, the mortgage. It's a lot for you to handle in your state." My state, I was grieving my husband, not incapacitated. A knot of anger began to form in my stomach, a tiny hot coal in the icy emptiness of my grief. "I'm fine," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "Liam and I planned for this. The mortgage is almost paid off. We have savings." Jessica waved a dismissive hand, as if my financial stability was a minor, inconvenient detail. "That's not the point," she said, her voice hardening. "The point is, this house is a family asset. It belonged to the family when Liam was here, and it still does. You can't just stay here forever." I stared at her, utterly bewildered. A family asset. Liam and I had built this. My hands had painted these walls. His calculations had made it safe. It was ours. "Jessica, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "This is my home." That's when she delivered the line. She let out an exasperated sigh, the kind one reserves for a petulant child. She looked down at me, sitting on the floor amidst the memories of my dead husband, and her face was a mask of cold impatience. "Don't be so dramatic, Barbara," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet room like shattering glass. "Liam is gone. It's sad, yes, but life goes on. It's time to be practical. You need to pack your bags and learn to stand on your own 2 feet. We're putting the house on the market." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds nonsensical and cruel. Then they landed, each one a physical blow. Pack my bags, learn to stand on my own 2 feet. As if the last 6 years of my life, my marriage, my partnership with her brother, meant nothing. As if I were nothing more than a tenant whose lease had expired. "You can't do that," I whispered, the photo album sliding from my lap. "The house is in my name, too. We owned it jointly." Chris smirked. "Actually, due to a technicality in the way the final deed was filed, you have right of survivorship, but Jessica, as Liam's only surviving blood relative, has a claim she can contest. It would get messy, ugly, expensive." It was a threat, cloaked in financial jargon. "We think it's best for everyone if you accept a small settlement," Jessica added, the viper's hiss coated in false sympathy. "A little something to get you started somewhere new. A condo, perhaps. It would be much more manageable for you." They weren't just suggesting it. They were telling me how it would be. In the space of 5 minutes, they had erased my marriage and demoted me from a wife to a charity case. The grief that had been drowning me began to boil, transforming into a rage so pure and hot it was startling. They had misjudged me. They saw a fragile, broken widow. They were about to discover the woman her brother had loved. A woman who designed, planned, and built things to last. And I would not let them tear down my life. After Jessica and Chris left, the silence they left behind was different. It wasn't just empty and amore, it was laced with menace. Their words echoed in every room, tainting every surface I had so lovingly chosen with Liam. "Pack your bags, don't be dramatic." I felt like a ghost in my own home, my claim to it suddenly fragile and contested. For days, I existed in a state of shock, the grief now tangled with a terrifying anxiety. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an intruder. Every car that slowed down on our street felt like them, coming back to evict me. I started locking the doors, even during the day, a prisoner in my own sanctuary. The rage I had felt during their visit had cooled into a hard, dense knot in my chest. It was a cold fury that demanded action, but I had no idea where to start. They had lawyers, financial advisors, and a chilling lack of conscience. I had memories and a half, pay, doff mortgage. My first coherent thought was Daniel. Liam's best friend since college, Daniel was a corporate lawyer. He was sharp, methodical, and had loved Liam like a brother. He'd been quiet since the funeral, giving me space, but now I needed his mind, not just his sympathy. I called him, and my voice cracked as I relayed the conversation with Jessica. He was silent on the other end of the line for a long moment, and then I heard him exhale slowly. "I'm not surprised, Barb," he said, his voice grim, "but I am disgusted. I'm on my way." When he arrived, he looked at my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes, and his expression hardened. He sat at our kitchen island, the one Liam had built a custom charging station into, and listened as I recounted every word, every nuance of Jessica and Chris's visit. The technicality on the deed is garbage, he said immediately, his legal mind kicking into gear. Standard joint tenancy with right of survivorship means the property passes directly to you. It doesn't even go through probate. Her contesting it would be a frivolous lawsuit, but their goal isn't to win in court. It's to scare you, to bleed you dry with legal fees until you give up and accept their insulting settlement. He was right. It was a war of attrition. They were banking on me being too broken to fight back. That conversation with Daniel was the first flicker of light in the suffocating darkness. He promised to look over the deed and all our financial documents, to be my official counsel. His presence alone was a shield, but the whispers in the walls continued, not just in my head, but in reality. I started noticing small, unsettling things. A piece of mail, a bank statement I was expecting, never arrived. Then a letter from Liam's life insurance company. A policy I knew existed was also missing. I called the company, and they confirmed it had been sent out 2 weeks ago. When I asked them to verify the mailing address, it was correct. Someone had intercepted it. Then one evening, as I was pulling into the driveway, I saw a car I didn't recognize parked down the street. It pulled away quickly as I got out of my car. Inside, I saw Jessica's silhouette in the passenger seat. They were watching me. The most disturbing discovery came from Liam's home office. I was looking for a warranty for the dishwasher and opened a filing cabinet I hadn't touched since he died. Tucked away at the back, in a folder labeled Personal, I found a series of printed emails. They were between Liam and Jessica, dated from about 6 months before the accident. The tone was fraught with tension. Jessica was asking for money, a significant amount, for what she claimed was a misinvestment opportunity, through Chris. Liam's replies were firm but stressed. He refused, telling her it was too risky, and that he was worried she and Chris were getting in over their heads. The last email from Liam was chilling. It read, "Jess, I'm done. This is the last time I'm telling you no. I know you logged into my investment account. The password has been changed. Don't ask me for money again. My priority is my wife and our future." She had tried to access his accounts behind his back. This wasn't just a greedy sister making a play after his death. This was a pattern of predatory behavior that had started long before. She hadn't just seen an opportunity in his death. She had been waiting for one. The house wasn't just a house. It was the prize she felt she had always been owed. The whispers were becoming screams. My grief was still immense, but now it had a partner, a cold, clear, diamond-hard certainty. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was defending my husband's memory from the vulture who was his own sister. The emails were a starting point, a crack in the facade of Jessica's manufactured grief. When I showed them to Daniel, his expression shifted from sympathetic to strategic. "This is good, Barb," he said, tapping the printed pages. "This establishes a pattern of behavior. It shows motive. She wasn't just a grieving sister. She was a frustrated creditor." We sat in my sunroom, which was now our makeshift war room, and laid out a plan. Daniel explained that while the emails were damning character evidence, we needed something more concrete to shut down Jessica's legal threats for good. We needed irrefutable proof of her deception, something that would make any legal challenge against me so toxic that no lawyer would touch it. The first step was a full financial audit. Daniel put me in touch with a forensic accountant, a woman named Maria, who had a reputation for being able to find a single misplaced dollar in a sea of transactions. For a week, I gathered every financial document I could find: bank statements, investment portfolios, tax returns, credit card bills. It was an agonizing process, each document a paper cut reminding me of the life Liam and I had planned. I saw the down payment for the house, the savings account we'd labeled Future Kids, the investments he was so proud of. As Maria worked her magic, Daniel and I focused on the other angles. The missing mail was a federal offense. We filed a report with the Postal Inspection Service, creating an official paper trail of harassment. Daniel also drafted a stern cease and desist letter to Jessica and Chris, formally warning them to stop all contact and to stay off my property. It was a small step, but it felt like I was finally pushing back. My own investigation, however, happened within the walls of my home. Liam was methodical. As a software engineer, he believed in backups, redundancies, and secure storage. He had a main server in his office for work, but he always said, "The most important stuff isn't on the network." I started thinking about his habits, his little quirks. He had a love for old spy movies and a healthy paranoia about digital security. Where would a man like that hide his most important secrets? It was my knowledge of him, our life together, that led me to the answer. It was my domain, the design of the house itself. In his office, there was a large, built-in bookshelf I had designed. It was made of reclaimed oak with a rolling ladder, just like he'd always wanted. One of the shelves, the third from the top, had a slightly deeper recess than the others, a design choice I'd made to accommodate a large art book. As I ran my hand along it, I remembered a conversation we'd had while building it. He'd joked about creating a secret compartment, just like in the movies. At the time, I'd laughed it off. Now, I wasn't laughing. I pulled all the books off the shelf. At the very back, disguised as part of the wood grain, was a nearly invisible seam. I pressed on it, and a small section of the back panel clicked open. Inside was a small, black box. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. It contained a single, encrypted hard drive and a small leather-bound notebook. I plugged the hard drive into Liam's laptop. It was protected by a password, but I knew what it would be. Our sanctuary, the name we secretly called our house. The drive unlocked. It was a digital treasure trove of evidence. Liam had kept a meticulous record of every financial interaction with Jessica. There were scans of loan documents from years ago that he had given her and she'd never repaid. There were screenshots of her unauthorized login attempts to his investment accounts. Most damning of all, there was a detailed record of a family fund their parents had left them. Liam's notebook explained it all. Their parents had left them each $50 to be invested and not touched until they were 40. Liam had grown his share responsibly. Jessica, with Chris's expert advice, had cashed out her portion years ago and lost it all in a series of bad investments. The hard drive contained the financial statements proving it. She wasn't just coming after my house for profit, she was coming after it because she was broke and desperate. She believed Liam's success, our success, was rightfully hers. The final piece of the puzzle came from Maria, the forensic accountant. She called a day later, her voice grim. "Barbara, I've gone through the life insurance information. Liam had a policy for $1 million. You are the sole beneficiary. However, someone filed a change of beneficiary form 2 days after his death, attempting to make Jessica a 50% beneficiary. The signature was forged. The insurance company flagged it as suspicious and rejected it, but they didn't inform you yet because they were opening an internal fraud investigation. There it was, not just greed, not just harassment, but felony-level fraud. They hadn't just tried to intimidate me, they had tried to actively steal from me using my dead husband's name. The truth wasn't just unlocked, it was laid bare in all its ugly, undeniable detail. Jessica hadn't just hissed, she had struck. But she had no idea her venom now came with an antidote of pure, cold fact. The discovery of the hard drive and the news of the forged insurance form shifted the atmosphere in our war room from defense to offense. The knot of fear in my stomach had been replaced by a block of ice. I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced since before the accident. The path forward was no longer about simply surviving Jessica's attack. It was about ending it, definitively and permanently. I wasn't just protecting a house, I was executing Liam's last, unspoken defense of our life together. Daniel, upon seeing the evidence from the hard drive, leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "This is it, Barb," he said, his eyes scanning the fraudulent insurance form I'd gotten a copy of. "This is the whole case. We don't just have a shield anymore. We have a sword. Several swords, actually." He explained the legal ramifications. The mail tampering, the forged documents, the conspiracy to commit fraud. These weren't just grounds for a civil suit. They were criminal offenses. We had the power to not only protect my assets, but to potentially send Jessica and Chris to prison. The thought was sobering. This was my husband's sister, but any flicker of familial sentiment was extinguished by the memory of her cold eyes as she told me to pack my bags. She had drawn the battle lines. I was just choosing the battlefield. Our plan, our blueprint for justice, was multifaceted. It was designed not for a messy, public court battle, but for a swift, quiet checkmate. Daniel believed a public fight was what Jessica wanted. She was a marketing manager. She knew how to spin a narrative. She would paint herself as the grieving sister trying to protect her family's legacy from a gold-digging wife. In the court of public opinion, a grieving widow can be easily recast as a villain. We couldn't let it get that far. Our strategy had 3 phases. Phase 1, the legal fortress. Daniel's first move was to consolidate our position. He compiled all the evidence, the emails, the contents of the hard drive, the statement from the forensic accountant, and the official report from the insurance company's fraud department into an airtight legal file. He then served Jessica's lawyer a low and bulldog she'd hired to send me threatening letters with a notice of his representation, along with a formal rejection of their settlement offer. The letter was intentionally vague, stating only that we had irrefutable evidence of malfeasance, and that any attempt to contest my ownership of the house would be met with a vigorous and comprehensive counterclaim. This was the warning shot. Phase 2, the financial strangulation. Chris, the slick financial advisor, was Jessica's engine. He provided the veneer of legitimacy, and I suspected the technical how for the fraud. Daniel did some digging and found that Chris worked for a large, reputable investment firm with a strict code of ethics. An employee committing insurance fraud, even in their personal life, would be grounds for immediate termination and likely a revocation of their financial licenses. Daniel drafted a second package. This one contained only the evidence directly implicating Chris in the insurance fraud scheme. It was addressed to the head of compliance at his firm. We didn't send it, not yet. It sat on my dining room table, a silent, powerful threat. Phase 3, the controlled demolition. This was my part. I was an interior designer. I created cohesive, powerful presentations for a living. I could take 1,000 disparate elements, colors, textures, fabrics, furniture, and weave them into a single, compelling story. I would do the same with our evidence. The final confrontation wouldn't be a shouting match. It would be a presentation, a reveal. I spent a day converting the key pieces of evidence into a clean, simple slideshow. A timeline of the harassment, screenshots of the threatening emails, a summary of the missing family fund, a high-resolution scan of the forged signature next to Liam's real one. It was a story of greed, deception, and criminal intent, told in bullet points in stark black and white evidence. Liam had built the technical defenses. I was designing the theater of their downfall. The plan was set. Daniel would request a formal meeting with Jessica and her lawyer, framing it as a final opportunity to resolve this matter before litigation commences. Chris would surely be there, whispering in her ear. They would walk into the conference room, expecting to intimidate a grieving widow into signing away her home. They would be walking into a meticulously designed trap, where every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall that was about to fall on them. The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon at Daniel's downtown law firm. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect: dark wood, leather chairs, and a long, imposing table that felt miles across. It was sterile, official, and a world away from the warmth of the home they were trying to take from me. I sat on one side with Daniel, a simple file folder in front of me. I felt strangely calm. The grief was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but the fear was gone, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. Jessica and Chris arrived with their lawyer, a man whose cheap suit and blustering demeanor did little to hide his unease. They walked in with an air of confidence, but it was brittle. Jessica sat opposite me, her expression a practiced mix of sorrow and determination. Chris sat beside her, his arm draped possessively over the back of her chair. He gave me a small, condescending smile. They thought they were in control. Their lawyer started, launching into a prepared speech about the emotional value of the house to the family bloodline and the moral imperative for me to accept their generous offer. He droned on about protracted legal battles and the emotional toll of litigation on a fragile widow. I let him finish, my hands resting calmly on my folder. When he was done, Daniel simply leaned forward. "Thank you, Mr. Davison," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We appreciate your perspective. However, we won't be needing to discuss a settlement. Barbara is not leaving her home, not now, not ever. In fact, we're here today to discuss the terms of your client's complete and total withdrawal." A flicker of confusion crossed Jessica's face. Her lawyer scoffed. "On what grounds? My client has a legitimate family claim. Your client—" Daniel interrupted, his voice dropping, "has committed multiple felonies, and we have proof of all of them." He slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the rejected change of beneficiary form for Liam's life insurance. Jessica's eyes widened. Chris's smile vanished. "The signature is a forgery," Daniel stated flatly. "Liam's insurance company has already opened a fraud investigation. They have forensic handwriting analysts. We have them too." Their lawyer picked up the paper, his face paling as he read it. Chris started to speak. "Now, wait a minute. This is a misunderstanding." "Is it also a misunderstanding that you have been illegally intercepting Barbara's mail?" Daniel continued, his voice like ice. The Postal Inspection Service is very interested in that, or that you made multiple unauthorized attempts to access Liam's private investment accounts while he was still alive. He slid another document across, a printout of the login attempt logs from Liam's hard drive. It was my turn. I opened my laptop, turned it around, and started the presentation I had prepared. The first slide was a simple title, a timeline of events. I walked them through it, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I showed the emails where Liam refused her money. I showed the financial records of her depleted inheritance. I showed the log of her watching my house. With every click, another brick of their story was pulled away. Jessica's composure began to crumble. Her face, once a mask of polished confidence, was now a canvas of disbelief and panic. Chris was frantically whispering to their lawyer, who was shaking his head, his own professional survival kicking in. The final slide was a picture of Liam and me on our wedding day, smiling and happy. Beneath it, a single line of text. This is the only family legacy that matters. I closed the laptop. The room was silent. Here is our offer, Daniel said, breaking the silence. You will sign this document right now. He produced a legally binding agreement. It states that you relinquish any and all claims, real or imagined, to any of Liam's estate, including the house. You will cease all contact with Barbara, effective immediately. You will admit in this document to your fraudulent actions regarding the insurance policy, an admission we will hold in trust, and if we don't, Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel leaned back. He picked up the thick envelope addressed to the head of compliance at Chris's investment firm. He didn't say a word. He just held it up for them to see. Chris stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. He knew his career, his entire life, was contained in that package. Sign it, Jessica. He hissed, his voice tight with panic. Jessica looked at me, her eyes filled not with remorse, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. She had lost. She snatched the pen from her lawyer and signed the document, her signature a vicious slash of ink. Chris followed suit, his hand shaking. They left without another word, their lawyer trailing behind them, already trying to distance himself. The battle was over. There was no shouting, no dramatic courtroom scene. Just the quiet, satisfying click of a well-laid trap snapping shut. In the days following the meeting, the silence in my house changed again. The menacing undertones were gone, replaced by a profound, echoing peace. It was still quiet, still a house built for two that now held only one, but it was mine, unquestionably, unequivocally mine. The legal document Jessica signed was an ironclad end to her campaign of terror. Daniel kept the evidence package, a permanent deterrent should she or Chris ever think of stepping out of line. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Chris's firm did an internal review anyway. Perhaps their lawyer tipped them off to save his own skin, and he was let go a few weeks later for unethical conduct. Jessica seemed to fall off the face of the earth, deactivating her social media, and, from what I heard, moving to a different city. Their world, built on greed and deception, had collapsed under the weight of its own rotten foundation. My world, however, needed to be rebuilt. Securing the house was the end of a war, but it wasn't the end of my grief. Winning didn't bring Liam back. A long time, the house felt too big, the victory hollow. Every room was a memory, every object a story about him. For a while, I considered selling it, just as Jessica had wanted me to. Maybe a fresh start in a new place was the answer. I even met with a real estate agent, but as I walked through the rooms, explaining the custom details, the thought process behind the design, I realized I wasn't selling a house. I was giving up our story. This place wasn't a mausoleum. It was an archive. It was the last and greatest thing Liam and I had built together. Leaving it wouldn't be a new start. It would be an erasure. That was the turning point. I decided to stay, but I couldn't live in a memorial forever. I was an interior designer. I reshaped spaces, so I started a new project, transforming the house from ours to mine. It wasn't about removing Liam, but about making space for myself, for the future he would want me to have. I repainted our bedroom, changing the serene blue we had chosen together to a warm, vibrant terracotta. It was a color of earth, of grounding, of a new sunrise. I turned his office, the place where I had found the secrets that saved me, into a bright, airy studio for my own design work. I kept the bookshelf he loved, but I filled it with my own books and sketches. I hosted a dinner for Daniel and a few of our close friends, the first time the house had been filled with laughter since before Liam died. It felt strange at first. Wonderful. I was reclaiming the joy that had always been meant for these walls. My biggest project came a year later. Using a portion of the life insurance money Liam had so carefully planned for our future, I started a foundation in his name, the Liam Project. It provides funding and my pro bono design services to create beautiful, functional, and safe living spaces for families transitioning out of homelessness. The first home we completed was for a young mother and her 2 children. Seeing the look on their faces as they walked into their new, fully furnished apartment, a space designed with dignity and hope, was the first time I felt a sense of purpose that rivaled the love I had for my husband. It wasn't just about charity, it was about continuing the act of building that Liam and I had started. We had built a home for ourselves, and now I was using his legacy to build homes for others. The pain of losing him will never fully disappear. It's a part of my own design now, a deep grain in the wood of my life, but it is no longer the only feature. My life is not defined by the man I lost or the people who tried to tear me down. It is defined by what I choose to build. My foundation is solid, my walls are strong, and my future is a space I am designing, one day at a time.